Good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Wolfgang Fuchs. I teach Islamic Studies at the University of Freiburg, and I don't want to stifle debate by all means or get into the way of our discussion, but I think some introductory remarks are in order before we sort of jump into this evening. I would like to quickly introduce four players, so to speak, tonight who have been responsible for putting up this event. I would like to introduce to you the Junge Akademie, the former challenging perspective that this evening is a part of, also the research group, Cultures of Debate, and of course our esteemed guest for tonight, Chantal Mouffe. And the Junge Akademie is a misnomer. It's actually not that young anymore because it turned 20 last year, which you also see on the posters that we have in our background. And it is only young if you consider the standards of academia. So all of our members are several years into their, after their PhD, that they get elected to the Academy. It was established in the year 2000 by two of Germany's oldest scientific and scholarly academies, the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities, and also the German National Academy of Sciences, the Leopoldina. The Junge Akademie comprises 50 members that are elected for 5 years. And so there's also constant change. That's also part of the idea. And in order to celebrate our coming of age and our 20th anniversary last year, we put on a series of high-profile events that were supposed to happen at a venue in Berlin, but I don't need to tell you why this didn't materialize in the way we planned it. But the idea was to showcase 6 of our research groups that the Junge Akademie entails, or that it is part of, and the research group that is responsible for this discussion today is, surprise, surprise, called Cultures of Debate, and was founded with the interest in mind that currently the academy and public discourse is both hailed and dismissed. And one of the questions that is important for us in this research group is, what does it mean for society when expertise and academic analysis no longer automatically hold a position of authority, but find themselves confronted with accusations of elitism similar to those that are currently being directed at journalists or politicians, for example. And very much related to this, this overall topic that is of interest to us is also the topic of tonight's discussion, namely, what role does arguing play in politics? And we could have wished for no better guest than Chantal Mouffe, who is a political scientist and professor emeritus of political theory at the University of Westminster in London. As a co-founder of Radical Democracy, she is a proponent of an agonal theory of democracy, and her understanding of politics is that it is a space of conflicts. And sort of representative publications of hers are, for example, Agonistics, Thinking the World Politically, that was published in 2013, and For Left Populism, published in 2018. And the evening will proceed as follows. Chantal Mouffe will kick us off with a short lecture, and then 6 members of our research group, who will then also introduce themselves in due time, will ask some questions, get us going, and then you, as our esteemed and cherished audience, will also have a chance to ask questions in the chat. So without any further ado, thanks so much, Chantal Mouffe, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Okay, well, good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really delighted to, participate to the celebration of the 20th anniversary. Of course, as you indicated, recently is already a bit late. It was last year, but still it's better to have a longer celebration. So I've been asked to give some kind of short introduction to introduce my agonistic theory of democracy. And this is what I'm going to do. It's going to be mainly a theoretical. I'm going to try to make it not too specific to philosophers, so that I know the composition of the academy is very multicultural, in a sense, or multidisciplinary better. And then on the basis of those theoretical ideas. I think we can have maybe if you are interested in a discussion in which we are going to, examine more how this, can be applied into different fields. So I'm going to begin by delineating the theoretical framework which inform my approach. And first, I want to start with the distinction that I propose to make between politics and the political. I mean, to make this distinction, in fact, suggests a difference between two types of approach. Political science, which deals with the empirical field of politics, and political theory, which is the domain of philosophers who inquire not about the fact of politics, but about the essence of the political. When it comes to the question of this, what is the political, there are in fact two main conflicting conceptions. There is on one side a view which envisages the political as a space of freedom and public deliberation. This is called the associative conception of politics, while others see the political as a space of power, conflict, and antagonism, and that is called the dissociative conception. Well, clearly my understanding of the political belongs to the dissociative conception. I mean, I want to insist on that because, according to the view of the political that you have to start with, and this is it's a postulate. It's not the question of saying, one is right and other is wrong. It's simply they are two possible views, and one has got to decide among them when you start a reflection. And according to the view you start with, of course, you are going to pose different questions and have different views. So this is very important to understand. So the way in which I make the distinction between the political and politics is the following. By the political, I refer to the dimension of antagonism, which I take to be constitutive of human societies. And by politics, I refer to the set of practices, institutions, through which, in fact, order is created, or practice and institutions that organize human coexistence, but always in the context of conflictuality, which is, of course, provided by the political. Well, according to the dissociative conception of the political, and I insist this is from where I'm speaking, political questions are not mere technical issues to be solved by experts. Properly political questions always involve decisions which require to make a choice between conflicting alternatives. And I am particularly very concerned by the fact that today in our society there is a real incapacity to envisage problems in a political way. And I think that, which means that basically I think the view which dominates both, what is the political is the associative and even, because as we are going to see in a moment, there are some different views of the associative. But, the worst one, the one which is dominant today, is the one which is linked to the idea of post-democracy. Political questions are merely technical, as I was saying, and it's basically better to leave them to be solved by experts. So, there is no role really for a democratic discussion. And I think that this incapacity that we have today, and this is why I, in my book, For a Left Populist, say that we are living in post-democratic societies, to envisage the issue, which concern how to organize our common life in a political way, it, to a great extent, due to the uncontested hegemony of liberalism. Well, here I need to specify what do I mean when I speak of liberalism, because of course, there are different forms of liberal, well, there are many forms of liberalism, but yeah, one need to distinguish, for instance, political liberalism, which is the institution of the rule of law, division of power, individual liberty. That's something that refers to political side. Liberalism can also be understood in the term of economic liberalism, and of course, It's related to capitalism. But in fact, here I'm speaking particularly of liberalism as a philosophical approach. A philosophical discourse, which of course is also many variants, which are united not by a common essence, but by what Wittgenstein will call a family resemblance. So I think that's, but it's basically a philosophical approach. So you don't need necessarily to accept that approach and defend, economic liberalism. There is, in fact, a much more important link between political liberalism and this philosophical approach. But what is important is to distinguish between political liberalism as a philosophical approach, and I'm leaving for the moment aside the question of, the economic system that corresponds to that. So when we speak here of liberalism in as a theoretical philosophical approach, we must recognize there are many, of course, forms of understanding this liberalism, and some of them are more progressive than others, but save a few exceptions, the dominant tendency in liberal thought is characterized by a rationalist and individualist approach. And because of that, people who follow that approach are not able to adequately grasp the pluralistic nature of the social order with the conflict that pluralism entails. Conflicts for which no rational solution could ever exist. And this is by that I refer to the antagonism that characterizes human society. Because what is an antagonism? An antagonism is a specific type of conflict. It's a type of conflict that has no rational solution. You've got to make a decision, to choose, to take a position with respect to that. And of course, this is what this liberalism negate. And the typical liberal understanding of pluralism, because of course pluralism is something that all liberals defend. In fact, we could say it's one of characteristics of liberalism. But the way they understand pluralism is, in my view, not adequate. Because their understanding is that we live in a world when there are indeed many perspectives, many values, but that due to what they take to be empirical limitation, life is too short, there are only 24 hours per day, 365 days in a year. Because of that, in fact, we are not, and will never be able to adopt all those positions. I mean, we can say to put oneself in the shoes of all those people. This is something that we will not be able to do for empirical limitation. So we are not able to do that, but somebody that will see the world from outside, from what is sometimes called the point of view of Cyrus, will see all those multiple views and see all those views composing an harmonious and non-conflictual ensemble. So they believe that pluralism is something there, multiple of views that can, be made to coexist. That's the dominant view in liberalism. Of course, there is another understanding of pluralism, and that's the one that I follow, is the one that one finds in Nietzsche or in Max Weber, who said that, pluralism, they refer to the war of the gods, this is, in fact, the conflict of value, that pluralism, if you accept pluralism, you must necessarily accept that there will be conflict, because not all those views can be reconciled. So I think that's very important. We are going to enter into discussing, democracy. So I think that because of his conception of pluralism, the liberal type of political theory is absolutely unable to understand the political in its antagonistic dimension. In fact, we could say that liberalism is to negate antagonism. It's not simply that they can't understand, they strictly negate it, because by bringing to the fore the inescapable moment of decision, And here I use deletion in the sense in which, for instance, Jacques Derrida said that to decide is always to decide in an undecidable terrain. A real decision is a decision in which, there is no the rational solution. You've got to decide, think, and take a position, take a stand. So this is, of course, what antagonism brings to the fore. So, in fact, antagonism reveals the limits of a rational consensus. There is, in that case, no possibility of a rational consensus. And of course, this is one of the central tenets of the liberal approach. There's always the possibility, to, through set of procedure, whatever, to in fact come to a consensus. Well, when we examine the different perspectives existing within contemporary liberal thought, and here particularly when it refers to the way to envisage democracy, we can distinguish two main paradigms. The first one, and it's called the agricultive conception. Be careful, it's not the same thing as the associative view, but is a paradigm that envisages politics as the establishment of a compromise between competing forces in society. That is, individuals are portrayed as rational beings who are in the field of politics driven by the maximization of their own interests, and they act in the political world is a way which is basically instrumental. Or they are going to choose the party, to vote for the party that best represents their interests. So in fact, this idea is a form of political theory that is very much influenced by economics, and applied the idea of the market to the domain of politics. It is so. I've written an article from that showing that in fact it's political theory without politics, because it's in fact thinking of politics in terms of economics. That's the dominant paradigm in political science. And in fact, for instance, the more recent development in that political science is the one of rational choice. Rational choice is clearly something that corresponds to the aggregative view. But the aggregative view, if you want me to give you a name, that is Schumpeter. There is the conception of democracy according to Schumpeter, and is the view which is dominant in Department of Political Science. There are other paradigm which have developed a bit later. It's called the deliberative paradigm. Here, of course, we are referring to Habermas and his follower in Germany, but also, for instance, if we speak of the United States, it's the John Rawls. Rawls and Habermas are the two great defenders of deliberative democracy. Well, it's a paradigm which has been developed in a way, in reaction against the instrumentalist model which dominates in the aggregative view. And it's a paradigm that aims at creating a link between morality and politics. There is more to politics than just, instrumental charge of your interest. There is also a moral dimension. So they advocate to replace instrumental rationality, the one that dominates in the aggregative model, with the communicative rationality. Of course, that's one of the main theses of Habermas. So they see the present political debate as a specific field of application of morality, and they believe that it is possible in the domain of politics to create, this is what should be the aim, to reach a rational moral consensus by means of free discussion. Of course, there are going to be different, of course, if you follow Rawls, so there's going to be some procedure. If you follow Habermas, there are other procedures, but basically the aim is to, create a way to arrive at a moral consensus, and all that through discussion. And of course, in this case, politics is not apprehended through economics, but through ethics or morality. But, and this is what, the basis of my critique, in both cases, what is left aside by this rationalist approach, rationalist based on the mode of instrumental rationality or communicative rationality, is the crucial role played in the field of politics by what I call passion. And by that I refer to the affective dimension, which is central to the constitution of collective form of identification. And of course, this is what politics is about. Identification without which it is impossible to grasp the construction of political identities. I mean, here again, for instance, for the liberal view is all, and of course, the dominance of methodological individualism is always question of individuals acting, either according to morality or according to their interest. But one of the theses that I defend is that when you act as in politics, you never act as individual. You always act as part of a we. And I'm coming to this in a moment. So it's part of a group. Of course, it is you, one individual, but you as part of, the citizen or part of a group. This is, of course, always but the main thesis here is that political identities are always collective identities. And of course, this is another reason for which liberalism, because precisely of its methodological individualism, is not able to grasp the specificity of the political. In politics, we are always dealing with the us as opposed to a them. This is why politics is always partisan. And of course, this is why antagonism cannot be eliminated. So this is basic difference between my dissociative view and the ones that are dominant in the field of liberalism today. And I contend that it is only when one acknowledges the political in this antagonistic dimension, then we can pose the main question for democratic politics. And this question, patchy liberal theories, is not how we are going to negotiate a compromise among competing interests, aggregative model, nor how to reach a rational, fully inclusive consensus, a consensus without any kind of exclusion. Because despite what many liberals want us to believe, the specificity of democratic politics is not the overcoming of the us-them opposition, but the different ways in which this us-them is established. What democracy requires is drawing the us-them discrimination in a way which is compatible with the pluralism, which is constitutive of modern democracy. So I insisted that politics is always partisan, is always creation of us-them. But that does not mean that the us-them relation is necessarily one of friend and enemy. That is the strictly antagonistic one. And of course, my whole reflection is basically how we can construct the us-them in a way which is not antagonistic. And this is where I introduce the category of agonism, which I'm going to develop in a moment. But so it's not necessarily always, because of course in that case it will not be possible to think of democratic politics. But we must accept that under certain conditions, there's always the possibility that this us-them will become antagonistic. And this happens when the them, which is perceived or become to perceive as putting into question the identity of the us, the threatening the existence of the us. Because from that moment on, and here there is a good example that I usually give, or that can happen, and it's the disintegration of Yugoslavia. Because in that case, we have a situation in which we had basically, us-them, which was not antagonistic, but the Serb and the Croat, the Serb and the Bosnian, the Serb and the Sloven, they were not seen as antagonistic. But of course, death of Tito, Milosevic came to power, one was a Serbian superiority, and then, in fact, those relations became, because the Serbs began to see the Croat and the Bosnian as putting their identity into question, and so this us-them, which was basically difference, became antagonistic, and that is something that is absolutely impossible to create a situation that will exclude this possibility. So antagonism is an ever-present possibility. It does not mean it's always there, but it's always, and we need to conjure this danger. So let's draw a first theoretical conclusion so that you can follow my argument. What we can assert at this stage is that the us-them distinction, which is the condition of possibility of the formation of political identities, can always become the locus of an antagonism. Since all forms of political identities entail an us-them distinction, this means that the possibility of emergence of antagonism can never be eliminated. It is therefore an illusion to believe in the advent of a society from which antagonism will have been eradicated. Antagonism is an ever-present possibility, and this is why the political, under this dimension of antagonism, we can say that it belongs to our ontological condition. The consequence is that when we envisage the aim of democratic politics, we need to take that into question and to pose the question of what is democratic politics, having always the consciousness that there is always the possibility of this transformation of us-them into an agonistic one. Well, next to antagonism, there is another concept which is very important into my approach, is the in order to understand the question of the political, is the concept of hegemony. To acknowledge the dimension of the political as the ever-present possibility of antagonism requires coming to terms with the lack of a final ground, the undecidability that pervades every order. To put it another way, we can say it requires recognizing what we call in hegemony in socialist strategy, the book that I wrote with Ernesto Laclau, the hegemonic nature of every kind of social order. That is the fact that every society is the product of a series of practice attempting to establish order. But this order is always established in the context of contingency. Every order is the temporary and precarious articulation of contingent practices. Here, the main concept is the concept of contingency. And this is why this approach is also become a post-foundationalist approach. There is no foundation. Everything is contingent. This means in practice that things could always have been otherwise, and that every order is predicated on the exclusion of other possibilities. What is at a given moment considered as the natural order, jointly with the common sense. Here I use common sense in the same thing which Antonio Gramsci used common sense, not natural sense, but what is considered, at the moment, all things are, but of course it's always a hegemonic political construction. So the natural order is always the result of sedimented hegemonic practices. That is practices that have been established, but whose original character, has been erased. So we believe that this is all things are. What we don't realize that this is all things have been constructed hegemonically. So every order is not the manifestation of a deeper objectivity, whatever it's going to be, Hegelian, Marxist, or otherwise, that will be exterior to the practice that brings it into being. So let's resume this point. Every order is political and based on some form of exclusion. There are always other possibilities that have been repressed and can be reactivated. That's very important. The articulatory practices through which a certain order is established and the meaning of social institution is fixed, this is what we call hegemonic practices. Every hegemonic order is susceptible of being challenged by counter-hegemonic practices. That is, practices that are going to attempt to disarticulate the existing order so that we can create another hegemony. Once the ever-present possibility of antagonism is acknowledged, that's the center of the dissociative approach. one can understand why one of the main tasks of democratic politics consists in diffusing the potential antagonism that exists in social relations. Create the institutions that are going to make it possible when conflict arises, that is not going to take the form of us, them, because of form of enemy, because them in that form is body that need to be eradicated. And of course, this is not possible, not compatible with the democratic politics. And of course, this is, if we accept, this is why, for instance, so many liberal theorists believe that they got to negate antagonism. Because if we accept antagonism, it's not possible to think of the democratic politics, because of course, at least the pluralist democratic politics, because this is, then is in a way of legitimating us-them relation in terms of enemies, and then it means basically to accept to legitimate civil war. So, and this is why Habermas, in order to defend democracy, is got to negate the existence of antagonism. But
Chantal, I hope you excuse my feeble attempt at establishing hegemony and also establishing a precarious order here. This was extremely enlightening. Thank you very much for your very lucid thoughts.
Can I have 3 more minutes, because I've not made my main points, because I was well, look, let me.
Okay.
I did not realize.
Okay, 3 more minutes. That's all right.
Okay, yeah, because if not, I don't see you can. So what is the solution then? And in fact, democratic politics. Okay, let's make it very clear and short. Democratic politics is not to try to establish a consensus without exclusion. Okay, fine. It's to try to create the conditions so that when we have conflict does not take the form of an antagonism, a friend and enemy, but it takes a form which is compatible with pluralism. And this is what I call an agonism, because a situation of agonism is a situation that does not deny the fact that, there are some issue on which we would never be able to agree. So we can't try to reach a consensus. But what we can try to do is to create the institution which make it possible that when conflict arises, is not going to be constructed on the basis of the friend and enemy, but on the conflict between adversaries. And that is what I call an agonistic relation. Adversaries are in fact opponents that recognize that they will never be able to find a rational solution, but that, in a sense, recognize the right of their opponents to defend a different position. So and they are not going to see them as enemies to be eradicated, but as opponents, and they are going to find an agonistic relation is in fact, a conflict between different hegemonic conceptions. It can be very, strong opposition, but there is always the recognition of the right. They are not going to want to eradicate them. And my point is that this is what democracy is about, to try to create the condition for what Marcel Mauss, the great French sociologist, had a very nice way to put it. I said it in French, and say the whole question of democracy is comment on peut s'opposer sans se massacrer, to confront oneself, to oppose oneself without, killing oneself. So this is basically, to put it in a nutshell, my conception of agonistic democracy. And my point is that if you don't have an agonistic struggle, if you don't have basically an opposition, when citizens go to vote and they don't have the possibility of real choice, because, for instance, they say no more left and right, and in fact we can all agree that it is defended by the third way, or the Dreie Mitte in Germany. I mean, that's no, if the citizens don't have a choice, you know, well, you don't have democracy. This is what I call post-democracy. If you don't have a choice, if you don't have the possibility of an agonistic confrontation, but you don't, this is not what democracy is about, okay? Okay, so this is my main point. Democracy requires the possibility of an adversarial relation and a conflict, you know, position between different projects of how to organize society.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for this very enlightening talk. Excellent. So I think we all learned a lot, and maybe there are no rational solutions, but hopefully there are some intelligent questions. And I would like to hand over to Christoph for the first question.
Well, thank you, Simon, and well, thank you very much indeed for this rich and also concise and interesting talk. I agree very much on this notion as a constructivist that there is no real ontological order, and there have been many changes in political order. That reminded me also very much to, I think, Berger-Luckmann and others, how they would explain how we can always construct the world around us. However, as an ancient historian currently at the university in Bielefeld, I'd like to play the ancient historian card and ask a question to the last part of your talk, which probably allows you also to elaborate something more on the agonism. If I hear it from the ancient historian perspective, I hear agon, and I'm of course immediately reminded on the figure of an arbitrator. So whether I think of, I don't know, Homeric heroes at funeral games, and then someone is racing a horse chariot and is I don't know, breaking the rules somehow, then there is an elderly man with a long beard sitting and telling, no, you can't do that, or yeah, that was allowed. And of course, all the way down to the Olympic Games, we have the arbitrators regulating all sorts of agonistic competition. So my question would be, where or if there is this figure of an arbitrator regulating disputes in the agonistic world, kind of trying to, well, hold up the boundary to not fall back to the antagonistic world. So I'm interested in this, whether there is this figure and who could it be, or whether this figure can't be there in the theory, because it would mean a position of kind of undisputable authority, which is also difficult to envision.
Am I answering directly a question? Or yeah, okay. Yeah, no, you are absolutely right to come to put that question. No, I mean, the fact that I use the term agon, of course, obviously coming from the Greek, can lead to this idea that, you know, I'm using it in a sense in which it is used in previously in Greece. No, in fact, the way I use the term agon is not in that sense, because it's I would say that in the Greek case, and by the way, this is also something which I'm making criticism that I'm making of certain agonistic theories today, that say that's an agonism without antagonism. And I think that by the way, it's quite interesting, and the relation with, I am critical, for instance, of the view of Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt, sometimes she's presented, even if she did not present herself as an agonistic theorist, she is often today, because already now we have, in opposition to the deliberative view of democracy, there's been the development of an agonistic view of democracy. So I'm not the only one to use that term. But what I'm insisting is that the great difference between my view and the view of Arendt, but also, for instance, the view of Bonnie Honig or the view of Bill Connolly, is that there is a view of agonism without antagonism. And in fact, the case of Arendt is very interesting because clearly she brings this idea from the Greek. You know, there is a clear relation, a reference in Arendt to Greek politics. So no, this view is agonism without antagonism. So what is specific about my approach, and this is, for instance, this is an approach, the genealogy of my agonism is a genealogy that comes from Machiavelli. Machiavelli, there is no, and of course later on Hobbes, Carl Schmitt, Max Weber. You know, this is the dissociative view. So it's to be distinguished from the way in which it is used if we are, let's say, faithful from the Greek understanding of agonism.
Yeah. If I'm allowed to have one small follow-up question, it's interesting you mention Arendt again. I used Hannah Arendt recently in an article about Cicero by trying to say how Cicero reduces the space of, I would say, the political, because he plays the card of truth within Roman Republican politics. And so he is not treating his opponents as just opponents, but he is actually treating them as enemies by all his rhetoric. So I could actually use Arendt quite good, I thought, to evoke your idea, and I think you would agree on that, that you can't work with a notion of absolute truth in politics, because then there is no decision, no alternatives, and so on. However, it kind of still brings me back to the question of this position of the arbitrator, because in this article, I could say, as an ancient historian, I think Cicero is playing this card of truth in politics. And I'm kind of wondering who would be, or how can we actually point and say, okay, here someone is reducing the space of the political by making an argument about ontological truth, about a God-given order, and so on. Who is the position to decide? That is still kind of the spot I am struggling with. Or is that kind of majority of the discourse?
Yeah, there will be a lot to say about that, of course. Well, I mean, in the case of Cicero, I think that, well, the problem is, according to my view, Cicero is a rationalist, obviously, you know, and you insist there is truth. And there is an interesting discussion today, because there is kind of a renewal of Republican thought. People insist, and I'm very much in that, the difference between, there are different forms of republicanism. The main difference between, for instance, the republicanism of Cicero, with some form of, you know, elitist republicanism, and in fact, rationalist one, and Machiavelli. Machiavelli is a plebeian form of republicanism, you know. So I think that definitively here you've got a difference between I think that, of course, it will be maybe a bit going too fast to present. It will be an anachronism to present Machiavelli as having being you know, some kind of post-foundationalism, because it applied to his thought a category which definitively did not exist at that time. But I think that and the interest of many people for Machiavelli today, for instance, Claude Lefort has written a very interesting book of Machiavelli. Lefort told me, for instance, that once when Jacques Lacan read his book, he said, but Machiavelli was a minor precursor. You know, it's quite interesting. Machiavelli is definitively more, you know, affin to the kind of view that I'm developing, post-foundationalist, dissociative. Cicero, no. Cicero is from another tradition. It's rationalist, is their foundation, and so I think that it's very interesting to insist on. But you know, finally, Arendt is, and I know many people, you know, when I say that, but Arendt is very much a pluralist, but in fact, I written a piece in which I say, finally, in the end, it's not. There are many points of agreement between Habermas and Arendt, for instance. You know, there is the negation. Arendt does not accept the very fact of antagonism. She's not a dissociative thinker, and in fact, it's very clear that the pluralism that she developed is not the kind of pluralism of Nietzsche or the pluralism of Max Weber. In fact, she in her book Kant Studies in Political Philosophy, when of course she says the third critique in Kant, when she is the idea of enlarged thought that one finds in Kant, she really locates himself. Basically, one should have an enlarged thought to put oneself in the shoes of everybody else. So it's a form of pluralism which does not recognize that if you are a pluralist, you will necessarily come at a point when there is antagonism, because all those pluralists, you can't put yourself indefinitely in the shoes of everybody else, you know. Enlarged thought in Kant has got limits. So that I think, by the way, I would like to, since you mentioned at the beginning that as a constructivist, you agree on many of my points. I would insist that again, it's of course I feel very close to many constructivists, but there are forms of constructivism, and for instance, I have particularly written about that's a critique of Bruno Latour, you know, because I think that the constructivism of Bruno Latour is a constructivism that does not recognize the hegemonic construction. You know, it's a construction, yes, because for instance, Latour is in he insists very much on the idea of composition. Things are always composed, constructed in certain way, and they can be decomposed. So yes, but what he never acknowledged is the fact that those forms of composition are also power relation. You know, things are always so there is a constructivism, but does not acknowledge the hegemonic character, nature of constructivism. So again, there are points in common with constructivism, but there are forms of constructivism which are, you know, not recognizing the hegemonic nature of the construction.
Chantal, may I just jump in, because I would like to just come back to the other point Christoph mentioned in his question about the rules, and I would like to know how you think, why do we agree on these rules, and do we all agree on these rules, and what do we do with those who do not agree on these rules? I think that's a question not only for an ancient historian, but I'm teaching philosophy in Frankfurt. I think it's interesting to see also like what we do in current political crisis, like the best example would probably Donald Trump. Like he in some aspects didn't respect certain rules. So how do we deal with these people who do not accept your rules to change antagonism in agonism?
Yeah, no, in fact, I realize it's true. There is an aspect of Christoph's question that I did not deal with.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, but it's very important that you did that, because it's crucial. The question is that we can be here till next morning, you know, if we discuss that. Well, for me, basically, it's all a question of hegemony. You know, I don't think that it's a question of can I explain?
What do we do if liberal democracy is not hegemonic anymore? That if, like, someone says, no, we will not agree on democratic rules.
Well, I mean, there will
and I have more power than you.
well, there, you know, we can't take it for granted that liberal democracy will survive necessarily. The liberal democracy, and by the way, I think that this is a particularly crucial point today. And we are in a situation in which it's important for people to realize that the adhesion to oh God, I mean, we are entering. It's a fascinating discussion, but you know, I think it's really would take us. That is in fact where, for me, the question of affects is absolutely crucial, and the idea that people it's you accept to accept. You need to identify with those rules. So in fact, if let's imagine that and it's something which is not today absolutely impossible to imagine. For instance, we are already seeing the development of what are called illiberal democracies. You know, in fact, the fact that, or let me put it different, the adhesion to liberal democracy, you know, is not something that can be created through rational argument. You know, we are not Habermas and many people say, well, basically, you know, if you could prove to people that liberal democratic institutions are the one that will be chosen by rational individual under the veil of ignorance in distorted communication, you know, if they are the regime that rational people will choose, then, you know, they will accept it. I think it's completely, I don't want to do that. It's completely wrong, you know, because the adhesion to values is not something that can be based on rationality. It must be based on affect. And here I will make, for instance, reference. Well, I know that I'm using it in a way a bit distorted, but Spinoza used to say that, you know, ideas by themselves do not have force. It's if only when they meet affect that they have force, you know.
Only to some of us. The reasonable can still.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But so if you here we are entering another more deep political discussion. I think that for me, one of the big problems for the left is much too rationalist. The left believe that what they need to develop is theoretical, you know, argument. No. To enter into affect, that is what the right wing, the fascists do. We on the left, we are rationalists, we are going to give them. They are wrong. Why is it that today, you know, what I call right is making so much inroads is because those people know how to mobilize affects. And you know, to give you another example of that, which I think is very good. Recent election in Britain. Okay. On one side, we had Boris Johnson, you know, which is it doesn't have any real, you know, program at all, but only mobilizing take back control, you know, make Brexit done. He was able to mobilize affect, but basically also what we need to understand is that those programs which people feel empowered. So I'm going to give you the power to decide. Okay. On the other side, we had the Labour Party, and I'm very much a Corbynite, and I was totally, you know, defending their view, in which they were saying to the people, vote for us, and we are going to give you this. We are going to give you free broadband. We are going to give you that and that. it was not at all a discourse that was empowering people. It was treating them more as customer, what we are going to give you. So they had, and in fact, they had a very good program, but there was no way to mobilize affect at all. And obviously, Boris Johnson won. And I think that this is the case of Britain, but this is a case that we find in many, many, many countries. The left believes, no. If we've got the good program, people are going to accept it. I think they're completely wrong. They need to, I'm not saying here that leave aside rationality and arguments, but try to establish a link
ask a question
between rationality and, so because people believe today that the choice today is between rationality, our view of and people who disagree are irrational,
I have a question.
Because they mobilize.
Actually. Sorry.
Okay. I know that is, you realize that we are entering a terrain that can keep us here in discussion till tomorrow, but let's move.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, your question.
So I am Valeska Huber. I'm a historian of the 20th century, and I'm particularly interested in histories of communication and publics. And one of the questions that I'm dealing with at the moment historically is who can be part of publics, how are inclusion and exclusion in publics organized? And that would be a question that I would like to ask in relation to your theory of agonistic democracy. So what about equality in your theory? I mean, you've said a little bit about the rules in the discussion that we had just now, but I would be really interested in discussing a bit further the question of access, of equality, who's actually part of a discussion or a conflict or of dissent.
Yeah, well, in fact, it's another way to pose the question that was asked before, and to which I'm going to answer both. I hope, because let's say, the agonistic model is not an absolute pluralism. It means I don't consider that they are limit to pluralism in an agonistic conception. I mean, not all views can be part of this agonistic discussion. Say, not all opponents can be considered as adversaries. Of course, they are enemies still. And enemies are, in fact, those who put into question what I call the ethico-political principle of liberal democracy. In fact, the ethico-political principle is an expression that Montesquieu used. What the affect that move a regime. The ethico-political principle of liberal democracy are liberty and equality for all. Okay, fine. But of course, and in order to be considered as part of the agonistic struggle, you need to accept those principles as being the principle that, can organize our society. But obviously, you can accept them and a very different interpretation of liberty. Much of political theory is precisely different way to understand liberty. Equality, the same, and for all, who is part of the whole. So what I think that for me, what the agonism should consist in a debate about different interpretation of commonly shared principle. Okay, this is so I call that a conflictual consensus. So there is a consensus on the principle, there is a dissensus about their interpretation. Obviously, there are people who will not accept those principles, but those people, in that case, they are enemies. I mean, doesn't mean that we are going to kill them, obviously, but simply they should not be able to, for instance, organize as a party, enter into the election, and have the possibility to legally arrive to power. So those are enemies. They are simply, they don't have the same. that's very easy to say, but of course it's not so easy to establish the limits, you know, because for instance, I mean, I know in Germany you've been having the discussion about that, but and in France not so much today, but still people, you know, not that long ago, a couple of years were saying that the Front National, you know, the Marine Le Pen should be outlawed, because they say she's not Republican, they say of Marine Le Pen. Republican meaning she doesn't have a conception of, you know, the society that corresponds. Well, you know, this is a very complicated issue to resolve, because, okay, could we say that Marine Le Pen or any kind of movement, you know, what I would call right-wing populist, is somebody that negates those ethical political principles, or do they give an interpretation of those principles that we don't like, but are nevertheless legitimate? And I would tend to agree more on that, because Marine Le Pen, and this is also one of the reasons why, and I've been very much criticized for that, I think it's too simple to call that the extreme right. Because, you know, extreme right historically, at least in France, don't know, is a political movement that was against the liberal democracy, that was against representative democracy, that wanted to put an end to that. Well, there are no right-wing populist parties today that say we should, you know, put an end to liberal democracy. What they do is to interpret liberty and equality in ways, and particularly, let's say, in the case of Marine Le Pen, but it's true for many right-wing populist parties, is the for all, because the all, okay, are immigrants part of the whole or not? You see, that's a big question.
Yeah,
that's a big
also question. I have two questions actually. One is exactly the one that you're asking now. So are immigrants part of this game, for instance? I mean, obviously, Protestants on the street would be a way of voicing dissent, right? I mean, there are different ways, I guess, to voice effective dissent. But I mean, who is part of the all, I think, is still a crucial question that we would ask. And another question that comes to my mind in the discussion just now is that it seems that a lot of what you're saying is still organized around national lines. But I would be really interested in hearing a bit about the question of global democracy, or also kind of global debates. I mean, what are the limits? Are these debates still organized around national lines, or are they not much more globalized by now?
Yeah, but that's also another very good question. There's a lot of discussion about that. My position is that, well, I don't believe in global democracy. I think that, but I think we should not be trapped between national and global. I mean, what I argue, but that of course is in my book For a Left Populism, is that basically, I mean, after all, the place when one can exercise the right of citizenship is in the nation state, you know. So one need to begin by the nation state, and then of course establish links with other countries, because after all, internationalism, this is what it means. It is always a question of nation. And for instance, in several of my books, if you've read For Antagonistic, you see that I'm very critical of cosmopolitan democracy, because I believe that there is no way in which one can have a democracy of the world. Democracy is always from democracy need to begin at the nation state and then articulate with other movements. So it is, I think that one cannot. There are many people on the left today that say no, one should organize only at the world level, you know, and should, every form of organizing nationally is fascistic. And no, I believe that I believe one of the reasons why the alter globalization movement finally, after years in which it was very important, and mobilized a lot of energies, let's be honest, it disappeared today. Still, even if they celebrated an anniversary very recently. And I've been discussing that with some friends of mine and trying to understand the reason. And most of them were very active there and were telling me, well, the problem is that, we used to go to Porto Alegre and with those wonderful discussions with a lot of people from all over the world, and it was fantastic. But then we will go back to our countries, and then we had absolutely we did not represent anything. And in fact, many of those people who were in those meetings were NGOs, so which had no roots in their country. And I think that if you want to have an effective politics, you've got to organize at the national level, not only, but start at the national level. And then, this is one of the reasons why I'm very critical of Varoufakis and his Diem. I think one should not organize at the European level straight away. One should organize in Germany, in France, in India, and then from there, move up, but not from top down. So that's the question about nationalism. And the other question, excuse me, was about the immigrants. Well, I mean, this is the question where I don't think that there is a rational solution to that. It's a political stunt. I mean, the kind of left populism that I advocate is a populism in which the people the immigrants are part of the people, obviously, but it's this decision in the political sense. I don't think that one can simply prove that we are right and Marine Le Pen who want to limit the people to or exclude the immigrants for the people. She's wrong. It's not a question of truth. It's a question of mobilizing effect. I think we need to create a situation in which there is how can I call it? Such a mobilization of effect that people will feel that immigrants are part of the same us, and it's not something that you can convince people by saying them, it has been proven through, this thing that the immigrants, it's a question of identification. People need to feel that they identify with the immigrants. You see where I'm coming to. That politics is very much a question of mobilizing affect, creating form of identification, and is not a question of giving the true rational argument to convince people.
Yeah. Can I come in there with the last question before we open to the audience as well? So in the Junge Akademie, we have members from all kinds of disciplines. So, for example, I am a political economist, so come from the discipline that studies politics as a market. And in many of those disciplines, of course, researchers are often seen as providing technocratic solutions to societal problems. And I can imagine that based on how you described your theory, you would probably be quite critical of the understanding of researchers as providing such technocratic solutions, rational solutions to societal problems. And so I wondered whether there is a place for researchers in an agonistic theory of democracy to play a role, or whether we should just consider this as a sort of a distinct subsystem of society that cannot play a role to inform political debates.
No, I think they can definitely play a role, but you need to acknowledge that those questions are not neutral. For instance, you can perfectly say, and here I'm thinking particularly of economists, for instance. If I will always say, if that case, our goal is to create a society in which we are going to provide equality for that. Then, of course, how can we do that? What are the best way to do it? Then, of course, you can ask experts, and you can ask, for instance, economists to imagine what is the way in which you can organize the production so that more equality or more liberty will be established. And then, of course, the expert can be very useful, but indeed necessary, because there are series of issues in which we need to have people with the baggage, the technical, but this is completely different from an attitude that will say, for instance, if there is no alternative, which is, of course, the dominant view according to neoliberalism. There is no alternative to neoliberal globalization, and the only way in which society can be organized is this. And this is when I was saying to envisage political question, a technical question to be dealt by experts. This is what I'm critical of. But once you accept that those they are always different answer to this question, that you can have, it's a political issue. This is a choice. I make a choice for this kind of society, and then, of course, I can have experts which are going to help me to imagine how to bring it about. But this is something that should not be presented as the neutral, the true solution to. I don't think that there is such a neutral thing in all the field in which there is a political dimension. For instance, I don't think that in the question will be posed differently in natural science, obviously, but in all the field of social science, you always need to realize that they are always different ways to imagine the question. If you need to take a stand, this is the kind of society I choose, and then those are the way in which we can be organized.
Thank you, Chantal, for answering all the questions that we had in such a very comprehensive manner. And we would like to open the discussion now to some questions we have received from the audience. And I would like to read out the first question that was posed by Milos Rodatos, who asks, regarding the recent fading out of a possible momentum for left-wing populist projects like Corbynism in the UK, Sanders in the US, Podemos changing ideological directions in Spain, Syriza, and so on, is it still feasible to follow a left-wing populist approach as strategy to implement an agonistic democracy, or do we have to take a step back and think about different strategic possibilities for an agonistic democratic project?
Okay, well, that's also a very disputed issue. And recently, several people have argued that left populism was a parenthesis, and that, well, indeed, it's not a particularly good moment for left populism. But and they are arguing, it's been argued, for instance, in Jacobin, the American Socialist Journal, that it's time to abandon populism and to come back to real politics, which is class politics. Well, I completely in disagreement with that, because I don't think that things will be better for the left in just think in Europe or in the Western world if it had been in developing a much more class-based politics. I think, and in fact I've argued that in a recent piece which has been published in the journal, digital journal Open Democracy, that the pandemic is really brought to the fore the urgency, the need, the vigency of a left populist approach, because it has brought to the fore things that always existed there before, but no, the question of inequality is so much, and the problem, with the fact that is usually the people who are more useful that are less paid. So, this, and also the fact, because the question, we need to understand exactly what the main thesis of left populism. The main thesis of left populism is in fact, I could say, first, that we need a politics that establish a frontier between left and right. It's what I call a return of the political, and to the third way politics. The media say there is no left, no right. We can all agree. Well, I think that definitively we are, and this current situation proves that we need to establish a frontier, and that frontier cannot be established on the traditional way in which Marxist theory constructed the proletariat against the bourgeoisie, capital labor. I'm not saying that this contradiction, this antagonism does not exist anymore, but there are many more antagonisms. For instance, because of the development of the consequence of the austerity politics and the development of the precariat, the question, what were called middle class, it become proletarianized, it become precarized. So it's very necessary also to win those people to a change of society. I think that basically, in fact, what the pandemic is on, it has exacerbated the crisis of neoliberalism, and left populism is envisaged as a response to the crisis of neoliberalism, the need to bring about a different regime, but through a popular movement that is transversal. It's a term that the people from Podemos use a lot. Transversal is an articulation of feminist demand, anti-racist demand, demand of the precarized middle class, demand of the popular sector also. But we need to really create what we call in hegemony a chain of equivalence between all those demands. Well, I think that this is still up, that is the center. And the third point, of course, is that this should be done on the basis of recognizing the role of mobilizing affect. So that's are the three theses that can, in a nutshell, give what is a left populism. Well, I think that is still very much what is needed, and that we should not believe that because things have did not go well for Sanders and for Corbyn, and it's necessarily it means that this politics should be dismissed. No, I think it's still very much what is needed today. So I don't see any alternative, because I don't think that a return to the traditional, social democracy. I don't believe that social democracy can be renewed in such a way that it will bring a solution to the present crisis of liberal democracy. And I don't believe that in the traditional Marxist opposition, capital labor, it's the one that should construct politics. So I don't see any other way to answer in a progressive way the actual crisis if it's not liberal left populism. But does not mean that it will necessarily win, because unfortunately the attempt by the right to face this crisis is definitively at the moment in more success. And this is, what more is, because I was saying in my answer to many of the questions before, I think that this is due to one of the big problems with the left is the fact that, there's much too rationalist.
Thanks, Chantal. Sort of your call for more effective way of politics and affects and emotions to some extent connects nicely with another question from the chat that I would like to pose to you. So, what do you think about Angela Merkel? Is she the ultimate post-politician?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, and in a sense, German politics is a good example of post politics, because the of course I'm not a specialist of German politics, even if I'm interested and I followed, but if you see the difference between the CDU and the SPD, the right and the left, is basically there's no real alternative that is offered there. I don't want to make too many enemies by saying what I'm going to say. No, but at some point we would have believed that the Green could offer an alternative, but unfortunately, as things stand, it doesn't seem that they offer much of an alternative, because it's again, I'm not a specialist, but apparently the idea of the next election of a coalition between the CDU and the Green will be a possibility. So, I think for me, the only party in Germany that offers something more in the line of left populism is Die Linke. But I know that Die Linke is not in a very good position either, So, but yeah, the situation is in Germany is very much and so it's not only Angela Merkel, because it's the German politics, which is very much in a post-democratic state.
Yeah, thank you for this. So the last question that I would like to read out from the chat comes from Katja, and she asks, recently, while writing for an upcoming publication, I crossed paths with your friend Judith Butler's latest work, The Force of Nonviolence. I would be greatly interested in which intricate ways your proposed theory of political agonism is influenced by Butler's notion of creating new political frameworks.
No, I'm sorry, but I'm not. I've never been influenced by Judith Butler. She's a friend. I've known her for a long time, and I appreciate much more, I would say, her political position. I think she's very courageous as a Jew to have taken the lot of position in defense of the Palestinians she's taken, but I'm not particularly a fan of more recent political work. I even if let's say I don't think that is enough of the dissociative view. I mean, recent work for me is too much influenced by Levinas and her idea of precarity and what is the name she gives to that? I forget at the moment. Yeah, no, in fact, well, we've got, of course, a lot of points in common. I mean, the idea of the performance, because obviously we come in, it's in a bit in the same way as well, I was saying that I've got point of commonality, like with the constructivists, you know, and theory of performativity. We've got, well, basically let's say one of the points, I did not refer to that in my talk, but I could have used the term, we develop in hegemony socialist strategy and non-essentialist view of politics. And of course, the work of Judith is very much inscribed in this perspective of a non-essentialism. But we've developed that very differently, you know, independently of each other. And I think that in a more recent work, I'm not particularly taken by the term of as I was saying, you know, Levinasian and thing like that is not the kind of way. If I'm trying to see if there's a point in which, yeah, I mean, they are for instance, I like this idea of contingent universality and a series of concepts, but not in the more recent one. I think there was a time in which I find more suggestive. I had certain ideas of Judith, but definitively point in of influence. No, I wouldn't see where I've been influenced by your work.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Thanks also for considering this point and for responding in such an engaged manner with all our questions. Thank you very much, Chantal Mouffe, for your time this evening. Thank you also on behalf of the Junge Akademie and the members of the research group Cultures of Debate. It was really wonderful having you. Thank you to our wonderful audience as well that you spent this evening with us, and we hope to see you at some other Junge Akademie events. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much to all of you for the question. Some was saying, you know, I wish we had more time because we could have engaged in very, very agonistic discussion about it. I feel on the basis of the question that you pose that we could really have engaged in an absolutely, you know, fantastic discussion, but obviously the time is limited. But I hope that in a sense you are not too frustrated by the fact that I could not deal absolutely with all the questions that you ask. But I hope at least it will give you, you know, some point of things to think about, and we did not felt that, you know, it was a disappointing meeting.
Not at all. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye then.
Bye.
Good evening.